Good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're going to start this morning with that powerful earthquake that hit off Russia's far east coast, triggering tsunami warnings across the Pacific from Alaska to Hawaii. The quake registered 8.8. That is one of the most powerful in history. It destroyed several buildings, including this school in the eastern part of Russia. Well, waves from the resulting tsunami crashed over the Russian shore. They were so powerful, they washed away buildings and large trucks.
Here in the U.S., the West Coast and Hawaii were put on tsunami alert as those waves rolled across the ocean. Officials in Hawaii scrambled to get people off the beach and to higher ground as forecasters predicted the large waves could reach land in Hawaii within hours. NBC meteorologist Angie Lastman is standing by with more on the impact of the tsunami. First, let's bring in NBC News international correspondent Molly Hunter, who joins us with the latest on this earthquake. Molly, tell us, with Russia, what can you tell us? What's the damage there?
Yeah, Joe, Savannah, good morning. And you've seen those pictures. It is a very sparsely populated area, that Kamchatka Peninsula, as you just said, in Russia's far east. So the big picture good news is no deaths, no injuries have been recorded. No major injuries, I should say, have been reported at this time. You did see those videos, though, of the flooding coming ashore, washing away buildings and houses and some big trucks. We do have some video, I believe, of doctors in a hospital continuing to operate as that quake hit. But as you guys said, 8.8, that is the sixth largest earthquake ever recorded, according to the USGS, and it was followed, as big earthquakes often are, by a number of aftershocks, including one measuring 6.9. Again, the good news is it is a very sparsely populated area. It did, however, trigger tsunami warnings for millions across the Pacific, though. And guys, right now, we just got this information in the last half hour. We are watching French Polynesia, very remote islands in the Pacific. The Marquesa Islands have said they are expecting 13-foot waves imminently, so we're keeping our eye on that for you.
Wow. Japan also, you mentioned some of this, but it got hit with some powerful waves. Do we know if there's any serious damage or injuries there?
Yeah, the good news is that right now, this morning, Japan has downgraded its alerts in a number of areas to advisories. 1.9 million people were included in those evacuation orders. You see those big waves coming ashore. The prime minister said the biggest waves were measuring about 4 feet this morning. There have been travel interruptions, traffic jams, train delays, but those 1.9 million people were across coastal areas as well as the Fukushima nuclear power plants. But guys, you will remember back in 2011 when 18,000 people were killed, a powerful earthquake triggered tsunami waves up to 133 feet. Japan learned its lessons, and they are crediting the early warning systems this morning for keeping everyone on the coast safe.
Yeah, no one can ever forget that tragedy. Let's talk about here in the U.S. As we mentioned, Hawaii was on alert as residents and tourists there braced for possible tsunami waves. So far, the state seems to have been spared. What's the impact there? What are we seeing there?
Yeah, so far is the key word, Joe. We're absolutely still watching. What experts say is that tsunami waves can still come ashore kind of in the hours, the 24, 36 hours after something like this hits. But from California to Hawaii, there are tsunami warnings still in place. In Hawaii, though, interestingly, the evacuation orders have now been lifted. It is safe to now return home. The Emergency Management Agency said there were no reports of major damage. That is good news. But the governor did speak out earlier today. Take a listen to what he has to say.
When that water receded in Haleiwa and we saw some boats kind of laying on the dry rock and sand, that gave us pause. That doesn't happen for no reason. When the water pulls back like that, that means there's activity in the ocean.
Activity in the ocean, really scary. The good news, though, is that flights have restarted out of Honolulu. The commercial ports are back open, but we are watching, of course, some of those low-lying areas in those islands very carefully, guys.
All right, Molly Hunter, so much. Thanks for kicking us off. Appreciate it.
And as we mentioned, this was one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. So I want to bring in NBC News meteorologist Angie Lastman with the impact of that and that resulting tsunami. Hey, Angie.
Hi there, guys. Good morning to you. Yes, we've got, of course, all the details that you just heard Molly just mention of that 8.8 magnitude earthquake on the eastern coast of Russia. As far as where it lands, we likely, once the finalized report comes out, we'll see it 6th or 7th in the top 10 largest earthquakes recorded in modern history. So no surprise that we initially initially were very concerned about what that would mean with tsunami impacts for places like the west coast of the United States as well as Hawaii. And you can see the distance to Hawaii from where that epicenter is about 3,000 miles. So we were looking at 6 hours. We, of course, have passed that time zone as well as the west coast about 8 hours. But that doesn't mean that we're not looking at any impacts from now through the rest of the morning hours. We're going to still be dealing with this tsunami advisory across the Hawaiian island chain. Notice this is not a tsunami warning anymore, but we've seen anywhere from 3 to 5 feet and close to 6 feet of observed tsunami waves. Specifically Maui, that initial wave, the water level fell to negative 3.5 feet, guys, but then rose 9 feet in 15 minutes. And this, of course, still a concern for the West Coast. We've got that tsunami warning still lasting for parts of Northern California, where we're still expecting an increase in those waves. Right now, the observed tsunami wave heights, highest of that location, coming in about 3.6 feet for Crescent City.
All right. Andrew Lastman, thank you so much. We'll see you in a bit.
We're learning more details about the victims and gunmen involved in Monday's deadly shooting here in New York. Police say 27-year-old Shane Devin Tamura shot and killed 4 people, including an NYPD officer who was working security at a Manhattan office building. The suspect then died by suicide.
2 officials familiar with the matter told NBC News the gunman left a note suggesting he had the degenerative brain disease. It's caused by head trauma and known as CTE. Well, last night, a multi-faith vigil was held where New Yorkers came together to pray and pay their respects to the victims. New York City Mayor Eric Adams says much more needs to be done to address gun violence.
We cannot respond to senseless gun laws through vigils. It must be responded through legislation. It is time to turn the corner of a society where automatic weapons are as easy to get as a cell phone. We need to rethink who we are as a society, that there is a level of comfortability to carry an illegal weapon of this magnitude.
MSNBC investigative correspondent Mark Santia joins us now with the latest. Mark, good to have you with us. So we know the medical examiner officially determined Tamura's cause of death was a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the torso. We know he left behind this note suggesting he thought he had CTE. We know the building where this took place, headquarters for the NFL. Dr. Ann McKee, who studies traumatic brain injuries, named in the note telling our Tom Yamas she wouldn't mind actually studying his brain, which is the only way you determine if someone had CTE. Just what's the latest?
So the latest is the New York City medical examiner reached out and confirmed to us that they will be examining the gunman's brain. That's part of the additional studies, they said, for the complete autopsy record. That suicide note that you mentioned, it was found in his wallet at the building on Park Avenue. We took a look at that suicide note. There were several names of doctors on that note. He also included, talking to one law enforcement official, he also included a password to his computer. There were several mentions of CTE, but he included his computer password, and the official said that basically inviting law enforcement to take a look at his past, take a look at some of his beliefs. Again, he believed that he had CTE. He played high school football, important, Joe and Savannah. He never played for the NFL, right. But he did play high school football and thought he had CTE. That's what he believed. It was mentioned several times in that 3-page note that was found at the building. As you mentioned, he did take his own life. He shot himself in the chest, and in that note asked repeatedly that his brain be studied. The NYPD did tell us that he has a history of mental illness. He, again, claimed he had CTE, and now we know that the medical examiner here in New York City will be taking a look at his brain.
We mentioned that vigil held last night. We know we're getting more information, just stories from those who loved the victims. Tell us what we know at this point.
4 victims, including Wesley LaPatner, who was a mom, a wife, a beloved friend. She was adored in the community. She was a Blackstone executive, very, very involved in her children's school and the community. Island Etienne, who was loved by his family and friends, 46 years old. He was a security officer at the building. Who also passed away, Julia Hyman, 27 years old. She was working on the 33rd floor. She grew up in the area, graduated from a Bronx high school, and then Cornell in 2020. Her high school said in a statement, they'll, quote, always remember, she will forever remember Julia for her light, bright smile and infectious laugh. And then NYPD officer, Dadarul Islam, who was a son, brother, father, and dad. 2 children. His wife is pregnant, expecting their 3rd child next month. He will be laid to rest tomorrow.
It's the most important thing we can do is remember the victims of this. The investigation still does go on, even though the suspect has passed away. We know detectives have searched his home, which is in Las Vegas. We also know the NYPD says that it wants to talk with the person who supplied parts to assemble the AR-15 style rifle. So where does the investigation go from here?
You're right, Joe. So the NYPD has multiple teams of detectives working right now, including a team of detectives out in Las Vegas, Nevada. They're looking at the lower receiver. What the police commissioner, Jessica Tisch, said, they're looking at that lower receiver of the long gun, which is the central part of the gun that includes the trigger. So they're going to talk to an associate who supplied that. One law enforcement official said they will talk to everyone who knew the gunman, friends, family, co-workers. And I said, you know, why at this point he took his own life? What's sort of the impetus for this? And they said, we want to prevent this from ever happening again. So if we can see that red flags, popped up, we're going to talk to people. He was supposed to be at work. He worked at a casino in Las Vegas. He was supposed to be at work last Sunday. Never showed up. Instead, police say he drove cross-country in his BMW here to New York City. So why? Did he talk to people? Did he mention anything? So the NYPD detectives, including detectives from the homicide unit, as well as a major case squad, they're out in Vegas. They're here working. And they're going to be looking at that and talking to people, going through his social media to see if there's anything that could have been spotted, any red flags, and any way to prevent this in the future.
All right, Mark Santia, I appreciate your reporting. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Well, with the president back from his European trip, questions continue to swirl around Mr. Trump's relationship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Speaking to reporters on board Air Force One yesterday, the president went into more detail about his abrupt falling out with Epstein. He said Epstein poached spa workers from his Mar-a-Lago club despite multiple warnings not to. Mr. Trump said that one of the women he took was one of Epstein's most prominent accusers, Virginia Giuffre. Giuffre said that she was recruited as a teenager by Epstein's accomplice, the convicted sex trafficker, Ghislaine Maxwell. Giuffre died by suicide in April. Here's more of what the president said.
People were taken out of the spa, hired by him. In other words, gone. When I heard about it, I told him, I said, listen, we don't want you taking our people, whether it was spa or not spa. I don't want him taking people. And he was fine. And then not too long after that, he did it again. And I said, out of here.
Mr. President, did one of those stolen, persons, does that include Virginia Giuffre?
I don't know. I think she worked at the spa. I think so. I think that was one of the people. Yeah. He stole her.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now on this. Monica, good morning. So, of course, this is just a story that is not going away for the president, and this acknowledgement that Epstein stole, as you just heard there at the end, Giuffre from Mar-a-Lago when she worked there. It raises more questions, right, for the president. Tell us more about what he said, what we heard from him, and the significance of Giuffre specifically being named here.
It certainly does raise more questions, Savannah and Joe, because it's the president introducing this new information. There had been a narrative that maybe the falling out with Jeffrey Epstein years ago had been related to a reported real estate deal that went wrong. Then the White House official explanation was that he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago because he was a, quote, creep. But this is the first time that the president is really explaining this with some more clarity, saying that maybe it wasn't just Virginia Giuffre, who is, of course, a person who was central to this case against Jeffrey Epstein, somebody who was very prominent in speaking out about his abuse before she died by suicide earlier this year. But he also implied that maybe this happened with other younger women who worked at Mar-a-Lago. So it's the most clear explanation we've heard about that, but it's also the president now raising more questions, which is, at the time, did that strike him as odd? Did he raise that with anybody? Did he know maybe some things a couple of years before Jeffrey Epstein was investigated for the crimes ultimately that he was in jail for before all of that? So that now likely won't go away for the White House, and they may have to answer a bit more on that front.
And we know Congress is paying close attention. The House Oversight Committee now has rejected Ghislaine Maxwell's request for immunity in exchange for her testimony. Why is that, and what does this mean for the push to get her to testify?
Yeah, so Congress was seeing if she would come testify in mid-August, just a couple of weeks from now. But her lawyer is essentially putting out some terms saying the only way we would do that is if you allow us to do so outside of the federal prison where she is serving that 20-year sentence, if you grant her immunity, and if you wait until this appeals process that's currently going on actually reaches the Supreme Court and reaches a conclusion, which could take months. So they also are saying they would like the questions in advance. And essentially, the Oversight Committee responded to that saying, look, we'll get back to you on some of those other requests, but in terms of granting congressional immunity, that is not something that we're prepared to do at this time. And you have Republicans and Democrats both saying that somebody who is convicted of sex trafficking the way that Ghislaine Maxwell is shouldn't be receiving any kind of immunity or any kind of clemency at this point, which we know President Trump, for his part, hasn't ruled out yet, guys.
Monica, we also understand that the Justice Department and the FBI are reviewing information that was reported by CBS News. This is about the existence of a complete copy of the surveillance video from the prison on the night Epstein died by suicide in 2019, something that has obviously fueled so many questions and conspiracies here. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, and of course, this is another area where there are just going to be more questions. And essentially, the FBI and the Department of Justice are saying there are copies of the entirety of the video that law enforcement does possess where you do see that so-called missing minutes. So effectively confirming that CBS News report to say that the narrative that's out there right now from some officials, including Attorney General Pam Bondi, is not correct, that it was just a glitch. When she was asked to explain this a couple of weeks ago, she said that the Bureau of Prisons had told her that that minute was kind of like a reset that would happen every night, so that there was always going to be a missing minute at a certain point in the day that would repeat as a pattern. But now, according to that CBS News reporting and what the FBI and DOJ are essentially commenting on, they're saying it does exist, but they aren't releasing it, and the reason for not releasing it is unclear. So again, that may prompt some more questions, too, from the MAGA base that has been demanding more information on the Epstein controversy.
All right, Monica Alba, thank you so much.
The Federal Reserve is wrapping up its latest rate-setting meeting today and is expected to keep interest rates unchanged again.
It comes after President Trump made a rare visit to the Fed last week. He ramped up pressure on Chairman Jerome Powell to lower rates in an effort to spur the economy. And meanwhile, the United States and China concluded trade talks yesterday with an extension on that tariff truce still up in the air.
NBC News senior policy reporter Shannon Pettypiece is here with the very latest. All right, so despite the president's visit last week, we pretty much know that the interest rates are going to remain unchanged. Talk more about what we can expect today and what it is the Fed wants to see before it does start to lower interest rates again.
Right. So the indication we've got is that the Fed is likely to hold rates steady. Sorry for the spoiler alert there. But the commentary is what Wall Street is going to be watching for. So there'll be a press conference after this meeting. And that's where investors are going to be listening for things like the tone that comes from Chairman Powell around how he's feeling about inflation. Is there still concern that tariffs could drag inflation back up again? Or are they starting to feel more comfortable about the direction inflation is heading in? Employment is another thing to watch. There's been some sort of shaky signs in the labor market. So how is the Fed thinking about that? So that's something to watch for today. I'm going to note, though, if you're a consumer and you're watching this, wondering if these rate cuts are going to mean your mortgage rate might go down or your auto loan or your small business loan, there are a lot of factors influencing those things in the economy right now beyond the Fed. So even if we were to see signs of a rate cut coming later this year, that's still only one of many factors that are going to be at play for things like your mortgage interest rates.
Does it seem like the pressure from President Trump could change the thinking of the Fed, of Chair Powell?
I mean, there's been no indication of that yet. And Powell is just one vote on this committee that sets interest rates. It's a 12-member committee. You need a simple majority for the Fed to decide to lower rates. As you noted, the president has sort of singled out Powell, attacked him. He made a sort of surprise visit to the Fed earlier this week and has been putting pressure on him. But even if Powell were to change his mind or to sort of feel some of that pressure, you need all the majority of the members of that committee in order for rates to go down.
This week, we've seen these trade talks between the U.S. and China. Did anything come out of these meetings?
We haven't gotten many details yet. There was a positive tone in some interviews that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent gave after this meeting, so indication that maybe there was some positive progress there. The president is now supposed to be briefed on those meetings and make a decision. What's at stake here is whether those massive tariffs that were put in place on Chinese imports, whether those stay, there's another extension on those, or if those are going to snap back if there is sort of no deal or agreement to kind of continue talking here.
And, of course, that uncertainty is one of the reasons why we maybe don't know what's going to happen with interest rates, because they want to know what's going to happen with tariffs, too.
Exactly.
All right, Shannon Pettypiece, good to have you with us.
Thanks, Shannon. Good to see you. Well, another scorching hot day is on the way for much of the country. country.
Angie is back with the forecast for the rest of the country. Angie, good morning.
Hi, guys. Good morning again. Yes, we do have more of this heat and humidity in place for some folks, but we've also got an indication of some relief for others and more on the way as we get through the next couple of days. So here's the lay of the land with your heat alerts. Notice we still have 133 million people at risk, not quite as many as what we were dealing with yesterday because those are no longer in effect across parts of the Great Lakes and the Midwest. It's from the plains down to the southeast and up through the northeast that we still see those alerts in place, and many of those are going to last through tomorrow as well. So heads up there. As we look ahead of the cold front, no surprise temperatures once again heading to the 90s for Lexington, for Memphis, for Richmond, for New York. Our heat index values close to 100, if not over 100 in most of these locations into the afternoon hours today. But you look just back behind that cold front that's really slicing across the Great Lakes and into the central plains, and temperatures are a whole lot different than they were yesterday in some of these spots. Chicago's going to see a high of just 78 degrees today, a lot closer to normal for where we should be for this time of year. And much of that relief starts to settle into parts of the northern New England as well as we get into tomorrow. Not so much for the mid-Atlantic, stretching down to the southeast and parts of the southern plains. You're still going to see temperatures in the triple digits for Dallas, feeling like the triple digits in Jackson, Charlotte, and Savannah. But we'll start to see some improvements on those temperatures as the weekend gets underway. The weekend across the Great Lakes and the Northeast is going to be really kind of delightful when you look at these temperatures compared to what we've been dealing with. We go to the low 70s on Friday for Philadelphia, back to the mid 80s by Sunday. Chicago flirting with those mid to upper 70s as we head into the weekend, and then returning to the 80s by the time Sunday rolls around. A little warmer for our friends in Nashville Friday through Sunday as we top out into those upper 80s. So some more typical kinds of temperatures for folks in that region here as we get closer to the weekend. In the meantime, though, we still have the air quality alerts that are in effect for the unhealthy for sensitive groups category. So heads up if you have any respiratory issues, anyone that's sensitive to air quality concerns, Washington, Baltimore, Philly, New York, and up through Newport, all included in that through the day today because of those ozone levels. And of course, we've got some severe storms we're tracking and the potential for some flooding. Quite a robust line of thunderstorms across parts of the Midwest. We're going to see that lasting through the morning hours and potentially dealing with some flooding concerns here, guys, as we get through the next couple of days as this cold front, yes, offers some relief, but also ramps up our rain chances and brings us, the flooding concerns.
Can we get a cold front without storms? Does that work that way?
I'll put in my request, but not making any promises.
It's funny to me call it a cold front. It's like, okay.
Right, 78 on the backside. That shows you just how warm it's been.
Hotter to less hot.
Yes.
Angie, thank you so much. Of course.
In Colorado, a jury is set to resume deliberations in the trial of a former dentist accused of poisoning his wife, killing her. During closing arguments, prosecutors accused James Craig of murdering his wife, Angela, to get out of the marriage. His defense team says she died by suicide. Craig has pleaded not guilty to several charges, including first-degree murder. NBC News correspondent Camila Bernal has more.
Members of the jury.
A Colorado jury now deliberating in the murder trial of former dentist James Craig, who is accused of killing his wife Angela by poisoning her protein shakes.
Well, this is a murder weapon.
In closing arguments, prosecutors said in 2023 he researched poisons before lacing her shakes and poisoning her with cyanide, arsenic, and eye drops.
He suddenly realizes he needs to go buy 12 bottles of eye drops? Give me a break.
Adding the father of 6 had been cheating for most of their 23-year marriage and killed his wife because he wanted out of the marriage, wanted the money, and did not want to ruin his image, according to prosecutors.
He cheated on his wife constantly. But this idea that somehow this was some sort of motive was nothing new.
Craig, emotional as his defense attorney made the case that the cheating was not a motive for murder, but it was a motive for suicide.
She wanted to kill herself.
Saying this home video shows Craig warned doctors of his wife's possible suicidal thoughts.
It's your fault they treated me like I was a suicide, like I did it to myself. And like nothing I said could be believed.
Doctors could not figure out what was wrong with Angela. In text messages presented in court, she said, "I feel drugged." And Craig replying, "Just for the record, I didn't drug you." Craig's future now in the hands of the jury. Camila Bernal, NBC News.
NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos joins us now with more on this case. Danny, good morning. So prosecutors called nearly 50 witnesses to the stand over the last 2 weeks. They say Craig's financial troubles, his infidelity drove him to kill his wife. Do you think the evidence, the arguments presented here were strong enough to convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty?
Yes, and the most powerful is often internet searches. Something that didn't exist several decades ago is now really a very reliable glimpse into a person's mind and what they're thinking at any particular time. So internet searches for things like how to kill someone without being detected. And I kid you not, that's pretty much the kind of internet searches we were dealing with as evidence in this case. You put that before a jury, yeah, sure. You may have totally independently, innocently been searching for how to kill someone without being detected, but you better pray that nothing happens to any of your loved ones if you're at home Googling that kind of thing, because it's the kind of thing that will get you convicted.
Danny, let's talk about the defense side of this. So as we just heard there, that this theory that they've put forward, his wife was battling depression, was potentially suicidal. If the threshold, right, for a jury is reasonable doubt, is there any chance here that you think that they heard enough to get there?
There's a chance, and his defense team did an admirable job of trying to raise reasonable doubt. Notice they didn't try to prove his innocence. Look, I read between the lines, and that tells me the defense team didn't have a whole lot to work with. And that's why they're relying on a very common traditional argument, which is, look, my client is not a likable guy. He's done some bad things, but he didn't do this bad thing. When you hear that, the rule of thumb is you don't have a whole lot to go with. And look, the reality is we criminal defense attorneys, we don't get to pick our facts. We don't get to pick our the theories that we want to put forward at trial. That's what the prosecution gets to do. Sometimes we can only work with what we have.
And here's the deal. Beyond the murder charge, Danny, Craig's also charged with trying to kill the case's lead detective and of trying to pay people to falsely testify that his wife planned to die by suicide. So on top of everything else in these seem like giant hurdles for a defense lawyer to overcome. What impact do those kind of things have on the jury?
This is in the category of consciousness of guilt. On the low end is just trying to conceal your crime. But I would say at the pinnacle of conscious of guilt evidence is when you try to hire hitmen to kill the people investigating your case, which virtually never happens. And if it's true, it's terrible evidence for the defense. It's almost inexplicable. There really isn't an explanation that you can offer to a jury. So it doesn't surprise me that the vibe I'm getting from his defense team, and this is nothing against them, is just that they're going for any reasonable doubt you can find. Motive is not enough, and they're right. This is, arguably a circumstantial case, but sometimes circumstantial evidence is the most powerful evidence, more than eyewitness testimony.
All right, Danny Ceballos, good to have you with us. Appreciate it.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.